Friends, sorry for this little disturbance. Now, I would request Dr. Ajarsi Das Gupta to please introduce the panel and start the proceedings.
Thank you, Professor Kumar. I hope Professor Parekh is now online. So, without further ado, let me begin by thanking Professor Kumar and the organizing committee for extending this privilege of introducing the eminent chair and speaker of this valedictory session. Over the fascinating sessions that have been spread over yesterday and today, we've been fortunate to look back at the disciplinary trajectory of our intellectual practice and the history of the Center for Political Studies in broad sweeps, intellectually as well as emotionally. At the same time, we found ourselves collectively contemplating the present with a sense of urgency and gathering the resolve and moral resources for a better future. So we have finally arrived at the valedictory session. Our chair, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, and I promise to keep it short, sir, is an eminent political scientist and a China scholar as well. He has contributed with a wealth of empirical detail and illuminating theorizations on social movements, human rights, development, and the regional role of India and China. He's also been, among other things, the vice president of the Council for Social Development, the editor of its journal, Social Change. He has also been the chairperson of Development Research Institute, Bhubaneswar, honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, both of which he helped to found and helped to evolve over the years. Until 2004, Professor Mohanty was the director, Developing Countries Research Center, and professor of political science at the University of Delhi. He has also held visiting assignments as professor in many universities and research institutions, both in India and abroad, including places like
Rajarsi, I think
yes.
we lost your connection.
Uh, have you lost my connection? Am I
Yeah,
audible?
for some moments, but I
No,
think
no,
it's
you're
okay
back
now.
now.
Now it's okay. Yeah.
It probably is at your end, Narinder. I'm going on. Okay.
Please go
Um,
ahead. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
please carry on. Yeah.
Thank you. Professor Mohanty has also been very closely involved with the PUDR in Delhi and the Pakistan India People's Forum for Democracy since their inception. He was part of founding the Boao Forum for Asia in China and REGAN, which is the Third World Sustainable Development Network in Brazil. His intellectual activities and mentoring extends much more, but I'll leave that for another time. Professor Mohanty has written certain path-breaking articles and books. I certainly got introduced to his work through this famous article, Challenges of Revolutionary Violence, the Naxalite Movement in Perspective, which came out in Economic and Political Weekly back in 2006. And then Grassroots Democracy in India and China, the right to participate, Ideology Matters, China from Mao Zedong to Xi Jinping, which is a more recent article, and Inequality from the Perspective of the Global South, which is, I think, one of his more recent articles in the Oxford Handbook of Global Studies. He has also written a large number of books, really. I'm only going to name the major ones, which are Class, Caste, Gender, Readings in Indian Government and Politics, China's Transformation, The Success Story and the Success Trap. I believe it has also been translated into Hindi and other languages. The Political Philosophy of Mao Zedong, Building a Just World, Essays in Honor of Muchkund Dubey, Contemporary Indian Political Theory, and many more. Our speaker for the day, Professor Lord Bhikhu Parekh, is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and of the Academy of the Learned Societies for Social Sciences and Emeritus Professor of Political Philosophy at the University of Westminster and University of Hull. He chaired the Runnymede Commission that produced the famous report, The Future of Multi-Ethnic Britain, in 2000. He is Vice Chairman of the Gandhi Foundation, a trustee of the Anne Frank Educational Trust, and member of the National Commission on Equal Opportunity. Professor Parekh received the Sir Isaiah Berlin Prize for Lifetime Contribution to Political Philosophy by the Political Studies Association in UK, the Distinguished Global Thinker Award by the India International Center, the Interdependence Prize for the Campaign for Democracy, New York, and the Padma Bhushan in 2007. As many of you know, Professor Parekh sits in the Lords as a Labour Party peer. He has mainly contributed to political philosophy, the history of political thought, social theory, ancient and modern Indian political thought, and the philosophy of ethnic relations. Among his works, besides the famously provocative essay published in 1992 titled The Poverty of Indian Political Theory, to which we are still trying to respond in various ways, Professor Parekh has authored a large number of books which are milestones in the discipline, beginning with, and some of which are, Hannah Arendt and the Search for a New Political Philosophy and Karl Marx's Theory of Ideology, both published in 1981, Gandhi's Political Philosophy, A Critical Examination from Palgrave, 1989, A New Politics of Identity, 2008. His more recent works include Debating India, Essays on Indian Political Discourse, another famous work being Rethinking Multiculturalism, Cultural Diversity in Political Theory, and I think the most recent work, at least that I know of, is Ethnocentric Political Theory, The Pursuit of Flawed Universals. The Center for Political Studies has shared a warm, rare, and precious relationship with both Professor Mohanty and particularly with Professor Parekh, which has extended from sharing the life of ideals and kind encouragement for our intellectual undertakings to an extremely generous grant from Professor Parekh for our institutional activities, which is known as the Nirman Foundation Grant. This grant facilitated a remarkable range of activities, from giving scholarships to students from disadvantaged backgrounds to making provisions for holding annual lectures of distinguished academics to holding workshops for students and faculty, activities that have been ongoing for many years now. It is only fitting to have him with us to mark 50 years of the center and to have Professor Mohanty chair the valedictory session. Over to you, Professor Mohanty, for chairing the valedictory session. Thank you.
थैंक यू नमस्कार आप लोगों को बहुत बहुत बधाई and I'm really privileged to chair the session where Bhikhu Parekh, the philosopher and a giant intellectual in the contemporary world, is going to give the valedictory lecture. The other day I said I always feel as an insider in CPS. And, only in one case we had succeeded in getting somebody from JNU to DU, that is Randhir Singh, 1973. But when I hadn't retired, Gopal Guru left my department to join your center. And after I retired, Nivedita Menon, Pradeep Dutt, and maybe some others also, I don't know, they joined JNU. Some people did reflect on the history of our discipline and centers and institutional profiles of DU and JNU. I wouldn't speak on that. I think currently they have all similar challenges to face. And I really congratulate CPS present faculty for conceptualizing this event so that we can all use this occasion to reflect on the 50 years and more. Some of us have been longer Bhikhu, Parekh and I, in this discipline. One thought that has been troubling me more these years, but I think for over a decade, or maybe from the early 90s, I would say the Babri Mosque demolition was my turning point of this thought, and that is the intellectual failure of my generation. Many of you know me only as an optimist, but behind that optimism, there are some serious broodings. And that is about our failure to arrest both a turn in India to values which we really oppose and a turn globally to neoliberal capitalism and autocracy as a trend, and constricting democratic rights both within India and globally. And the climate crisis, increasing violence, increasing inequalities are some manifestations of that. In other words, the last 50 years, I would say 75 plus years, I think post Second World War years of intellectual development has failed to arrest such trends. But here is the optimism, and I think Bhikhu Parekh would say that his 92 essay raised some questions, and today he would be very happy, and we are all waiting to hear him on that. That Indian political theory has many, many creative and innovative achievements. We are discovering what was already there because of our new methodological tools and analytical initiatives. But we have struggled, and I think CPS, DU, Hyderabad University, and many other places, and some old citadels like Madras, Patna, and Allahabad, and Banaras, of political studies, political science, and philosophy, particularly, have to now be resurrected. Their debates have to be resurrected, and we have to find answers to these, because the struggles and intellectual reflections, empirical work, theorization, philosophical reflections on contemporary as well as historical have always been the preoccupation of the centers. And that struggle gives us optimism. We struggled against emergency, made civil liberties and democratic rights as a part of the Indian common sense. That is also in danger in India and globally. But the struggle continues, and surely we have something to stand upon. I think I will stop here, and we all look forward to listening to a great mind who has inspired now 4 generations of political scientists and intellectuals in India and in UK and in other countries. I remember 2 occasions. One, that he as Vice Chancellor in Baroda with Thomas Pantham as the organizer of the seminar in the late 80s that he had organized, and one that we hosted him to give the first annual lecture of political science sometime in the early 1980s. But I have many memories of Bhikhu Parekh, which I will not go into. All of you know, and many would know in future. With these words, I congratulate political scientists all over the country that CPS has produced, and I welcome Bhikhu Bhai, Lord Bhikhu Parekh, but above all, the political philosopher Bhikhu Parekh, now to speak to us. Bhikhu Bhai, please unmute yourself. No, you are still muted. Have we lost Bhikhu again?
We have unmuted.
Yeah. Okay.
So what do we do now? Bolu?
Yes, now we can hear you, Bhikhu.
Summarize.
Sir, please speak. We can hear you. You have muted yourself again.
Unmute yourself.
Unmute कर लीजिए. Unmute.
Please unmute. We can't hear you. You had unmuted. You have again muted. Rajesh, please help him. Rajesh, he has muted again. We can't hear him. Please unmute.
Yeah, it's learning.
Please unmute. You are still muted, Rajesh.
उन्हें एक बार फिर से मीटिंग एंटर करने को बोलिए तब वो आता है ऑटोमेटिकली ही स्पीकिंग छोड़ के तो उन्हें नहीं करना पड़ेगा.
No. He's very much there. I can see him, but he's still muted.
राजेश भाई, ये आप जो नीचे जो आइकन दिखाई दे रहा होगा, एक फोन का आइकन दिख रहा होगा, एक जो माइक जैसा आइकन जो है और एक वीडियो जैसा आइकन है. तो आप जो माइक वाले आइकन को उस पे अगर क्लिक करेंगे तो वो अनम्यूट हो जाएगा. दोबारा से कहूँ का ज्वाइन करना.
हाँ वो इससे उनका माइक ऑन रहता है.
राजेश भाई आप एक काम करिए, आप दोबारा से ज्वाइन करवाइए सर को. एक बार लीव करके दोबारा से ज्वाइन करवा दीजिए.
सर को
I think Bhikhu Parekh is speaking something. We can't hear you. Unless you unmute, we can't hear you. Okay. Now please speak. Please speak. Don't mute
All
again.
right.
Yes.
What did you have for lunch today?
We have been waiting to have a better lunch from Bhikhu Parekh.
Well, I feel so bad about it because here am I ready to share my thoughts with you, only to find that I can't do that for the next 45 minutes.
Okay.
If even
Now
then.
you can. Now you can. Please carry on.
Who is going to hear?
We are all here. We are all
We
here.
are here. Still we are here. Don't worry.
More than 100 people are
100
waiting
people
to
are
hear
around.
you on the screen.
So please go ahead.
Please speak. Start your speech.
Rajesh? So if I speak now,
Yes.
will you be able to hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you. I have already requested you to speak. Both of us
Yeah.
have been introduced already. So please speak now. Start
Okay.
your valedictory speech.
Well, I'll start now.
Yes.
CPS completes its 50 years, and it is appropriate that should be commemorated in a way that evokes its history, its early dreams and hopes, and the imaginative attempts by its staff to design courses connected with teaching politics. I am privileged to be associated with this commemorative event.
Please carry on.
Our member institution for the study of politics. What is more important and what is striking, it must be one of the very few institutions in the country to stamp its students permanently with a particular mold. You can see the student and say he is a JNU product, something that you couldn't say about many other places who could come from anywhere. So it's a unique institution, capable of inspiring others, but not one that can be copied by them.
We have lost you again.
By the Western tradition of political thought.
Okay.
Its questions are derived from the West. Its concepts are borrowed from the West. Its method of inquiry is similarly borrowed. In fact, it is also very striking that so far as our Constitution is concerned, it is only the English edition which is regarded as authentic and authoritative, not the Hindi edition or anyone else, because it's the English edition whose vocabulary was capable of conveying the true spirit of the Indian Constitution. However, while Western political thought has dominated our thinking, there is a body of thought which we might call the Indian tradition of political thought that India has thrown up over the last 3 or 4 millennia. And the question is, while the dominant discourse is articulated in English language, in the language of the Western political thought, there is diffused in our society this Indian tradition of thought. And the question is, although this Indian tradition of thought does have some impact on the Western tradition, it doesn't get recognized, it's unintegrated. And the question for me is, how do you integrate the Indian tradition of thought and its insights with those of the Western tradition? Now, we might be told that it doesn't really matter what you do with the Indian tradition. It's too diffused. It has no legal standing. It has no political standing. Why take interest in it? And I can give you 5 good reasons why we must take interest in it. First of all, it's a matter of simple self-respect. A country which has had so many thousands of years of history ought to be proud of itself for having produced a body of thought. Secondly, it's also a question of India's cultural identity, that India hasn't grown up in a historical vacuum. It has grown up in a particular cultural milieu, and the imprints of that milieu are in every aspect of Indian thought. Thirdly, this diffused body of ideas forms a kind of background, and from the background, it influences our thinking. It shapes our unconscious collective memories. It also shapes our social institutions, which are all real. You might question the Indian vocabulary, but if you look at the caste system, it's already there. And you can't refer to the caste system except in the vocabulary of the Indian language. So I would suggest that we have this diffused body of Indian thought, which we have neglected during 200 years of colonial rule, hoping that it will go away, or it will simply be a matter of entertainment or amusement. The question is, it's not going to go away, it's continued to influence us. And if you can only step out of English language and speak in the language of vernaculars, you will see that all our vernaculars are suffused with this Indian tradition of thought. No one talks about independence or freedom. People talk about Swaraj. Nobody talks about my right. People talk about adhikar. The whole language in terms of which vernacular press talks about it is a language of Indian tradition of political thought. So for these and other reasons, I would suggest that one of the important duties that any academic institution has is to integrate its past with its present and its future. So that's my first task for the Center for Political Studies. The other task, and another one, which is even more important, India is just beginning to acquire global academic presence. The presence is still very limited and highly restricted to such areas as secularism. In fact, I would say that's the only area, thanks to several friends of mine, that India is being noticed and talked about. In order to make its presence unmistakably obvious and globally beneficial, India needs to undertake inquiries that go right to the heart of political theory. Question is, Western tradition of political theory has its limitations, has come to grief in certain areas, and the question is India or all Indian political theories capable of addressing the defects, limitations of the Western tradition of political thought and solve its problem for it? And I think it can. The tradition of Western political theory is open to three major lines of criticism, which have been made by a lot of people, including myself and many others. The first line of criticism against the Western tradition is that it takes the philosopher to be a transcendental being who rises above and indeed is in no way conditioned by space and time. He is part of society but is unaffected by it. He is part of a particular historical period but unaffected by it. He is a transcendental being. And the theoretical consciousness is a neutral, universally operating power and not a kind of a cultural capacity. So, not surprisingly, a political theorist doesn't think it appropriate to ask himself, who is he? Where is he located in history? Where is he located in the class structure of his society? He simply approaches the subject of investigation as a free, independent, transcendental being, assuming that if only he were rational enough, truth will fall in his lap. As a result, what he tends to do is very obvious. What appears obvious to him, he takes to be natural. In other words, he universalizes the particular. He absolutizes or naturalizes what is contingent. For example, he finds that in a particular society, such as the modern bourgeois society, human beings are self-interested. He generalizes this into saying every man is selfish by nature. Or he takes Christianity or Islam. He knows that their religion has three characteristics: a God, a prophet, and a text. So he turns to every religion and says, to Hindus, and he says, where is your God? Where is your prophet? Where is your text? Or he turns to Buddhism and asks the same question. And when the Buddhist says, we don't have a God, we don't have a prophet, we don't have a text, his response is, you're all half mad, you can't be taken seriously, you have no religion. In other words, because of this tendency to universalize the particular and to assume that what is obvious to him must be obvious to all must be true in nature, he approaches his subject matter with a considerable degree of arrogance and tends to do a lot of injustice to it. The answer to what I might call ethnocentric bias, the universalizing the particular, the answer to that, of course, is to recognize, for the philosopher to recognize that he's a culturally and socially situated being. limited by its limitations. And therefore, to open up the Western tradition to the presence of other traditions. There are several traditions in the West, but they are all marginalized. Bring them in. Bring in the diversity of the traditions within the mainstream tradition and make it inclusive. And when you make it inclusive, when it is open to a constant dialogue with other traditions, from that dialogue appears the recognition that what you take to be obvious is not so obvious. And what you take to be obvious is problematic. So this is my first line of criticism of the Western tradition of political theory. It needs to de-transcendentalize the philosopher and look at his world from the standpoint of his location in it. The second criticism of the Western tradition of political theory or political philosophy is that it subordinates political philosophy to the demands of philosophy in general. That somehow the philosopher works out a particular view of philosophy, applies it to politics, and the result is political philosophy. Now, I can't imagine more absurd and confusing way of understanding political philosophy. Because if you develop a view of what is philosophy from outside politics, outside morality, outside everywhere except through your head, then the question is, how is that view of philosophy going to apply to politics? There is also the other problem, that in the applying a view of philosophy developed outside politics to politics, you ignore the particularity of political questions and political concepts. You can't understand political concepts, analyze them in the same way that you can analyze other kinds of concepts. Because political concepts are historically informed, are culturally impregnated, are basically time bound and space bound. There is also the other problem that as long as you talk about political philosophy and think of philosophy as applied to politics, you link politics very closely to epistemology, to logic, to metaphysics, and other things, but not to other disciplines with which it can be even more closely connected, such as psychology, sociology, or anthropology. Because the political theory or political philosophy implies you or entails that you link it with philosophy. There is also the other difficulty that in the case of political philosophy, it is always judged in terms of its philosophical content, not its political content. A political philosophy, by definition, is bifocal. Politics is its subject matter, philosophy is its level of analysis. Therefore, it should be judged by two criteria. It's the penetration of its insights into politics, and secondly, the penetration of its concepts, its insights into human condition and philosophy. So you have to judge it by both its political content and philosophical content. By talking of only political philosophy, you are constantly channeled in the direction of judging it by philosophical criteria and not by political criteria. And the third line of criticism of traditional political theory is that the subject matter of politics is changing and is in fact undergoing profound changes. If you look at what Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, Aquinas, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, what they all meant by politics and what we today include in politics. Today, politics department includes ethnic studies, migration studies, public policy, political anthropology, public administration, international relations, you name it. So the subject matter upon which the political philosopher meditates, contemplates, is so infinitely varied that you can't simply expect his subject matter to be homogeneous. It is differentiated, it overlaps, it's cross-cutting, and has to be chiseled into courses, as we call them, to form part of a discipline. So what a political philosopher now has to do is to look at these various areas that he is studying, ethnic studies, migration studies, see their deeper connections and group them into certain manageable disciplines or sub-disciplines. So you might find, for example, that the concept of justice cuts across ethnic studies, international relations, and public policy. So the concept of justice becomes a binding, a unifying concept. Same thing can be done in other areas as well. Now, the tradition of political philosophy has invariably taken the polis, the state, as its framework of analysis. This was unavoidable as long as the polis was the basis of collective existence. This is increasingly ceasing to be the case today. States the world over are increasingly compelled to be locked in a globalizing world. There are common problems they face, like problems relating to nature and climate change and other things. And these problems generate common interest. Likewise, there is a universal feeling that nature is mankind's common heritage and that concerted efforts have to be made to preserve the ecological equilibrium. Equally importantly, at the moral level, there is increasing realization that that suffering of human beings in one part of the world is a matter of concern to others. That all human beings share a common heritage, common concerns, common sympathies. As a result of all this, a new set of questions are being put on the agenda of political philosophy. Questions like, do we have obligations to people in other countries? What are these obligations? Is mankind just a species, or is it also a moral community? Is it that the distinction between citizens and non-citizens, can it be rigidly drawn as it used to be drawn? When you have people in your own neighborhood dying, coming in small dinghy boats, escaping tyranny and oppression and coming to your country, and you close your boundaries to them and they drown. Do you have no feeling of concern for them? Do you not recognize them as, if not citizens, as at least human beings with certain claims, at least for a while? In other words, all kinds of questions having to do with transnational boundaries become important. So I would therefore suggest that the subject matter of political life, as we have known it so far, is undergoing profound changes, and the political philosopher ought to take account of it. In this context, I want to mention a delightful 4-page paper that the center produced, I suppose for all, but certainly for me. A paper explaining what the center's expectations are and what is the direction in which it expects itself to be going. And it said it will be creating 4 directions in which it wants to grow. It wants to create new synergies between various subdisciplines. It wants to explore transdisciplinary research. It wants to create international networks of support. And it wants to look at new intellectual horizons like ecology, climate change, and so on. Now, these are the directions in which it says it wants to go, to which my answer is fine. I'm delighted you are doing this. But can you bear two things in mind while you do this? First, you will need to refine these directions in the light of what I have said so far. Integrate the past Indian thought that is diffuse but still influential. Integrate the past Indian thought with the present and articulate a tradition of Indian thought. So that you don't merely talk about Indian thought, you also talk about the Indian theory or theories of political thought. And open up the Western tradition of political thought by making space for it, space within it for non-Western thought. And finally, to end, Indian thought, as I said, has so far not had a clear articulation. We have had a lot of people in the 19th century who rose to the occasion and wrote splendid works.
We have lost you again.
Monroe, Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru. I mean, all these people will not be allowed to vegetate, should not be allowed to lie in the backyard. It should be critically appropriated and integrated into the ongoing tradition of Indian thought. And once you're able to do this, we'll be able to see a tradition or traditions of Indian thought going back several millennia. Well, with those few words, I stop. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And do forgive me for starting so late in the day. Technology is beyond me, and evidently it is also beyond its own masters who have been helping me.
Thank you so much, Bhikhu Bhai. That was exactly what we were expecting, hoping to get new insights and
Well, you're very kind.
some surprise formulations, challenging some challenging ones, and absolutely a great valedictory direction-giving address. I will now open it for questions. I'll just take a minute or two to highlight a couple of points. I think I'm just following Pradeep Dutt's and some other chairs things so that people digest this profound speech in the next few minutes and raise their hands to come and ask questions. I think first, what some people call vernacular languages, vernacular articulations. I mean, I don't like that word vernacular. I think it's a colonial construct. So Indian languages, and there are many. There's nothing called dialect either. They're languages. So there are many Indian languages, and if we care to learn them and learn classical languages also, I think in the morning. Vasanthi really challenged so many of us who had studied Sanskrit, then forgot, and so on. Anyway, so the Indian languages discourse, I think, is extremely important, and there are many resources that we have forgotten. I think that is the first thing. Second, I think the main task today, and it has come up again and again over the 2 days, but also I would say that is the general problematic of our time. The unit at the bottom seeking connection with the global and claiming universality. So the colonial assertion of particular claiming to be universal and then using the colonial power to impose that is under challenge, of course, very effectively. And that is also leading to some extremities and false situations. That is being debated. But I think the ability to see that in different parts of the world, and it's not India and the West, it is all parts of the earth, people seeking to connect with the rest of the world, knowing fully well that colonialism limited those connecting abilities, and modern colonialism under neoliberal connectivity paradigms is again limiting those connectivities, but they're seeking to connect with the universal. I don't formulate it as local global. And there are many absurd formulations like think globally, act locally, again, colonial constructs. But the ability of the post-colonial world to generate that dignity consciousness, that people everywhere have civilizations, cultures, texts, written, unwritten, sculptural, cultural, many kinds of texts, which have meaning, and rest of the world have to be connected with that. Looks like an impossible enterprise, but if we don't recognize that all parts of India, all parts of the world are experiencing that new urge to connect, because that is part of dignity assertion. I think this is something you have very well pointed at. And the third point is about political. I think your brilliant, explanation, elaboration of philosophy and political philosophy, and your critique of what has happened, that was fantastic.
Seconds.
Sorry?
I lost you for a few seconds.
Oh, okay, no. I was praising your formulation of the political. And all that I want to say is, I think, and we had some excellent, discussions in the institution section on, how do we study in political institutions, formal, legal, or actual, and connected in various realms and so on. But I would extend that point. In fact, you have mentioned, I think power with certain purposes which are always related to the exercise or defense or protestation over power. And so therefore we call it, one way to articulate it is power and freedom. And every realm, and you saw how the new study of politics is interconnected with so many realms of social, philosophical, and ethnographic, cultural, and many other aspects of studies, intellectual realm, because power and freedom pervade every sphere of life and society. And that is the subject of politics, something that we are so proud of pointing at, or practicing. Well, these are some stray reactions, because they also connect so well with what Gopal Guru was talking about, the heartbeat of the concepts and the heartbeat of the human being. So philosophy and reality, philosophy and history, how do we connect? And in every context, in every part of the world. And there were so many, I could, the reciprocal questioning that, who was it? Srinivasan, yes, he was mentioning. And so many.
Would you like me to respond?
Just a minute. Pradeep Dutt talked about the flow, that there were no fixed foundations. And some people said, how can you have a Indian political thought without some concept of some foundational aspects? We had a very interesting debate on that. But indeed it's a flow. But flow, currents coming from where to where. So that plurality of global currents seen at various levels, how do we capture that? And we need new methodology for that. Well, Bhikhu, you want to respond to me? I think you should wait Unless you want to say something right away. Yes.
No. I would listen to as many questions as possible and then group them together and maybe respond collectively.
Let's do that. I was just, taking some time to
No, of course.
invite people to. Yes. Who? Vishnu wants to begin. Okay, Vishnu Mahapatra, please. And after that, Rahul Mukherjee. Yes, Vishnu, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor Mohanty. Thank you, Bhikhu Bhai, for this absolutely extraordinary presentation. And I just want to take one set of ideas forward and see whether you think it has a merit in extending it that way. One is about the using Indian languages. I'm also not very comfortable using the term vernacular, as historically vernacular is connected to the language of the slaves. Now, I just wanted to, Indian languages, the reason for doing this, apart from the idea of self-respect and the idea is that politics is thought and imagined and conceptualized in Indian languages. So it's very important that we take Indian languages seriously in terms of extending the frontier of our political discourse and imagination and thinking. The other thing is also to use Indian literary and cultural resources. Sometimes I find a Gujarati poet or an Odia fiction writer or a Kannada novelist giving us an idea about politics and justice and toleration or values, suffering or power, which is as articulate, as interesting, as intricate, as complex as a professional political thinker or analyst. So I would submit that in order to extend our political imagination and discussion, we must not only plumb the depth of our Indian literary and cultural resources, but we really look at it by not merely by translating it, because translating is as important, but also to see how Indian political discourse in different parts of this country can be also conducted and communicated in Indian languages. According to me, that will be a kind of very important part of really taking politics to the next level. Another brief question that I had, which is about how much of, for example, I think this is almost extending Professor Mohanty's argument that India and the West, or Western political philosophy and Indian philosophy, what about African philosophy, what about Latin American thinking and so on and so forth. Till now, when I was a student, very long time, our tolerance for our ignorance about Indian thinking was very high. I never felt very guilty if I told that I didn't know X Indian thinker, X writing in Gujarati or Odia or this thing. But if I didn't know a Western thinker, I somehow felt very guilty, as if I was supposed to know the Western thinker. So the tolerance for that kind of ignorance for the West was very high. The guilt was very high, but tolerance for ignorance of our own knowledge field was not so high. So I would submit that the fact that human life is limited and our time is limited, it's also possible that we have to really think of a time where our ignorance of the West might be forgiven if we compensate that by really understanding our own culture and tradition and make it an objective to really to think of very other kinds of ways of thinking about politics. I would stop there. I don't know if I was putting the formulation in a slightly complicated way, but thank you.
Thank you. Now Rahul Mukherjee.
Thank you. Can I be heard?
Not again, Rahul. I hope you are able to speak to us.
Can you hear me?
Yes. There is an accompanying sound.
Rahul, you will have to leave from one of the videos. You are in two videos here, so you will have to leave one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's better. Now speak.
Now you'll have to unmute here.
Can-
Yes.
can I be
Now
heard?
now it's fine. Yes.
Great. No, I was once again in yesterday's situation. No, I have a very simple question which is born out of my own ignorance. And I almost feel like a lost generation because I came to Heidelberg to find that, Sanskrit is being pursued. A Brahminical language, so-called, is being pursued. And through my readings in English translations, I find that some of the most transcendental ideas, certainly not that would support either Brahminism or Hindutva nationalism, are deeply inscribed in the Sanskrit language. And so would I also say for Persian. I mean, we are trying to see that, Persian should also be taught in our institute because a whole lot of Indian history is in Persian. So in some senses, we are trapped in the very manner in which Professor Bhikhu Parekh has kind of explained that. I was having this conversation with Professor Kaviraj once, and he said that, Rahul, the tragedy really is that a lot of people in the West who know Sanskrit don't have the kinds of access to resources that would actually make them understand the tradition much better. And a lot of people in India who know Sanskrit don't speak English. And they also do not connect with a kind of tradition that would enrich them. So, the problems are actually on both sides. And of course, you brilliantly, and for the first time, I think, helped me clarify in my mind, some of the questions that I had regarding the problem of the transcendental Western philosopher, the problem of not connecting with anthropology and sociology, and the problematic of politics, which was in the past, which doesn't connect with us now. Now, the question is, how do we do this? I mean, we are now faced with a generation like mine, which is neither fluent in Urdu, nor in Persian, nor in Sanskrit. We know a little bit of Hindi, a little bit of Bangla, but we don't read that much in Hindi as we do in English. But on the other hand, we do have the capacity to engage very deeply with historical materials of the present and read a lot of this philosophical material in English. So, and some of us are not going to be philosophers. We are going to be probably historically oriented political scientists whose work will have a philosophical implication, because I think every deep question has a. So the question is that faced with this kind of a predicament where we probably haven't read our Gandhi, our Vivekananda, our Ram Mohan Roy and others very seriously. We have all of these shortcomings, and we are confronted with a world which is different from the world where some of these ideas were born. You have given us an agenda of what we should do.
Rahul,
My question is, how would you fruitfully suggest that relatively illiterate people like us, who still have to deal with a very complicated social reality, how do we take this project ahead?
Thank you. Thank you. John Gitte. I may be pronouncing your surname wrong. Yeah. Yes, John. Yeah.
Hello, am I audible to all of you?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
All right.
Please.
Very good evening to all of you. My surname is pronounced as Guite.
Guite.
So,
Okay.
my name is John Thangalsan Guite. I'm a research scholar with the Center for International Politics and Disarmament in the SIS School of International Studies.
Okay.
And I also work with the National Human Rights Commission as a research consultant. So I have two basic questions and one, just a slight comment. So it won't be long. My first question is related, it's addressed to Professor Rajesh and to you, Professor Mohanty. As you already know, international relations.
Professor Bhikhu Parekh. Rajesh is only helping him.
All right, Professor Bhikhu Parekh and you, Professor Mohanty. As you already know, international relations is a branch of political science. So it is an indispensable family of the branch of political science. So is there, let me just come straight to the comment rather than the question, then I'll address the question later. The comment is, now that post-COVID times, we are slowly coming back to the campus, cannot so that there's an enrichment of the literature in the political thought, in international relations thought. Can CPS and CPOT come together for a young scholars conference, or more like a national conference together in a stadium or a multipurpose hall and present papers together? Because that'll be very exciting. So because actually the thing is, CPOT is it's a very active center, and as CPS, as we already know, is also quite an active center. So CPS and CPOT can also come together for a kind of a young scholars conference probably in the near future, probably next year if God willing. So coming to the questions, number one, to Professor, what was his name? I forgot.
Professor Bhikhu Parekh.
Professor Bhikhu Parekh. Hi, Professor Bhikhu. As you already know, you might not know, I'm from the Zo Kuki community, which is common to Mizoram and Manipur, right? So the thing is, what does he mean by Indian political thought? When you talk about the Indian political thought, are you encompassing the thoughts of the Tibeto-Burman speaking Mongoloid race from the Northeast? Because as you already know, there are a lot of faculties within India, and especially in JNU, who are from the Northeast, especially if you look at Professor Joy Pachau, Professor Kamkhansuan Hao Singh. He's also from Manipur, the Tedim guy. We are common to Manipur and Mizoram and Burma. So is the Indian political thought only encompassing the thought of thinkers like Nehru and all these Indo-Aryan Dravidian names rather than the Tibeto-Burman names, Because there's a lot of discourse today which is available from this particular region, from the Tibeto-Burman speaking language race. So basically, what does he mean by the Indian political thought? Is it the Indic race, or is it also encompassing the Tibeto-Burman, East Asian, Mongoloid literature?
Thank you.
The second question, I'm just about to finish it up.
Okay.
The second question is, I completely agree with Professor Bhikhu Parekh, right? Have I pronounced that correctly? Right. I completely agree with him by saying that political science is not only a study of states and institutions. Today, the study of, because my thesis is related to human security in the international security framework. Human security is about security of the individual. So me working in the human rights, I've always felt that human rights is indispensable to human security and national international security. So human dignity is at the core of the study of social sciences today. So if you can read the New King James Version, in Genesis it says, "For God made man in his own image and liking," right? So every human being has a right to dignity. So how much does political science focus upon the human rights aspect and the human security aspect of international relations? Thank you. Those would be my two questions.
Thank you.
What was last sentence? Human dignity, God gave man dignity. Then
let me just repeat my question to you, sir. Professor, if you read the New King James Version, right? In the chapter of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, it says, God made man in his own image and in his own image and liking, right? So human beings we believe that human beings are har insan Bhagwan ka bachcha hai, right? Every human being is a child of God, is a creation of God. And therefore, every human being has the inherent human right, human dignity. So human dignity is central to human security. So how much does CPS encompass the entire literature of human security and human rights for national and international security? So that'll be my question.
Yeah. I think let's have Bhikhu Parekh address some of these questions, and then we'll take a second round. Yes. Is that okay?
I think, sir, we can have this round only because we are already for.
Oh, I see.
Take one or two more questions. Go
Yeah. Okay.
Fine. Please.
Okay. Now may I request Bhikhu Bhai to answer the points raised.
Well, there are at one level, I agree with all of them. So there is no real disagreement or dispute. At another level, it's a matter of difference of emphasis. As you emphasize something more than I would. But let's take this young man's and then the others, just 2 or 3 questions. I think all of them, including Professor Mukherjee, appreciated the importance of, he didn't like the word vernaculars, I agree, but importance of regional, local languages. And I'm suddenly beginning to realize, Gopal, how important it is. If you look daily at a Gujarati newspaper or a Hindi newspaper and an English newspaper, you see very different world. The vocabulary is different. Different aspects of life are singled out. Whereas the English paper simply looked at the world from a metropolitan point of view, the Gujarati paper would look at it from a businessman's point of view, or a trader's point of view, or a shopkeeper's point of view. That's why I think it's very important that we should look at our reality as it is constituted by our languages. Because English comes on the scene only 200 years ago, and it can't therefore be the carrier of a country's civilization. Important language. Of course, we should learn it and study it and all that. I've done it for the last 60 years of my life. But all I'm saying is that it cannot be the sole or the most important vehicle of our ideas and philosophy. So in that sense, local languages become quite important. They are a storehouse, as Wittgenstein would say, that every language is a storehouse of wisdom, as storehouse of ideas, memories of a whole community. The other point was about human dignity, where again, I don't see why I would disagree with you. I wouldn't at all. The question would be, can be tackled in many different ways. It's very striking that the word human dignity appears in our preamble, which was introduced by, I don't know how many of you know, by Dr. Ambedkar. In our preamble, the word human dignity, it says human dignity consistent with the respect for something else, for national unity or whatever. It's very important that the word human dignity, which Ambedkar had written about and talked a great deal about, comes from him. And it's also the important notion that human dignity for the Constitution and for people who thought about it mean respect for fellow human beings, ability to control their own lives, and so on. So I think dignity is an important concept derived in this way, but I want to know what aspect of dignity did you want to emphasize? And on the Gopal's point of view, I mean, I pointed you made earlier, I agree with almost all of them. Maybe on this one question of whether I meant India versus the West or India versus the rest, that's not what I was thinking when I was talking about the West. And then from the non-West, taking an example only of India, that doesn't mean that only India mattered to me. I mean, I could have taken the example of China or Persia or whatever. But because we are meeting here and talking about it, I'm thinking of India's own contribution. If I was talking in China, I would talk about the Chinese contribution.
Okay. Thank you. Are there more questions? Yeah.
May I ask one, sir?
Bhupendra, okay.
Thank you, Professor Parekh, Lord Parekh, for.
Okay.
Forget the load bit.
Yes, sir. Sir, as there's a
Unmute Bhupender, you are muted.
thank you, sir. Now, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you for guiding our generation to retain a human dignity and moral community. I was wondering, in this spirit of guiding principle, there's a lot talk from the yesterday, from the morning session, that there's a need to decolonize the Indian political philosophy or theory per se. But there has been less focus upon the Adivasi or the indigenous political philosophy. So how do you see it, sir? I was wondering how this very project of decolonization of the political philosophy can be realized without acknowledging and giving the due respect to the Adivasi or the indigenous philosophy in its own life world and dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next is Vijay Bharati.
Hello, good afternoon all. I have just a clarification to Professor Bhikhu Parekh about when he distinguished this Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, he made this critique that every sphere has its own sense of understanding. I found it very reluctant when when somebody translates concepts like liberty, like swadhinata, or some concepts in some indigenous language. How would someone see it as as the kind of is translation is a mode of kind of translation is a mode of losing of concepts, or is every sphere has its own normative aspects? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
There's a hand next.
Hi, Professor Mohanty, may I?
Yeah. Vasan Srinivasan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Parekh, for reminding us once again of the riches which await our exploration and interpretation. But one of the problems that I face all the time is the specter of historicism. How does one sidestep that which haunts us all the time? We are supposed to situate the text historically and then go from there. Can we also then simply say that there are enduring questions and enduring political dilemmas which we want to illuminate through our explorations into the pre-modern? Any thoughts on that?
Okay, anybody else? Because I think the Senate wants us to wind up shortly. So anybody else have your question? Then we will have Bhikhu Parekh to reply. Okay, now Bhikhu, please.
Well, I mean, many of them, almost all of them, were more in the nature of comments and mild points of agreement or disagreement with what I had said, and I accept the points you are making. Although I must say that in the case of Vasantiben, I didn't hear the last part of it. So I heard the build up to the question, but not the question itself.
No, how does one get to identifying the enduring questions and dilemmas of politics? And can we do that confidently and sidestep the specter of historicism that haunts us when we go to the pre-modern material?
Yes. Well, it relates. I don't quite know how to.
Sir, may I ask one question, if you don't mind?
No, please,
Hold on. Mrityunjay,
Yeah.
hold on.
Yes, sir.
Professor Parekh was saying something. Just hold on, Mrityunjay, one second.
I was just trying to buy a little time to think about the question.
Okay, then.
And this Adivasi point is quite an interesting one.
Yeah. No, I think, if I can interject,
Yeah.
I think this point which John Guite raised and also Bhupinder raised, I think we have been grappling with this unsuccessfully, but grappling with this for many, many years. That, the right to history, right to civilization of all people whose rights were not recognized. And this is why they claim to be called language, not dialect. Not vernacular, but Indian languages. A Santali language or a Kui language or many of the 49 Naga languages. They have
Mizo, Kuki languages as well.
and Mizo Kuki. I mean, I'm just giving you some examples. All languages, let alone Adivasi languages. Even, I'm from a small, so long deprived nationality called Odia. So was Vishnu Mahapatra. Many times I have also felt that way, and so on. So the question is right of people, irrespective of sizes, to be recognized, right to civilization, right to history to be recognized. And therefore, I have grappled this in the context of China. Chinese political thought is not Han political thought. It's not Confucianism alone. It is as much Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, or the 56 minority languages of China, and there are many smaller languages and minorities who are not recognized. In other words, this so-called great tradition, little tradition, nonsense. I think all traditions have some greatness and some problems, complexities, and questionable dimensions in them. And therefore, construction of Indian requires not only decolonization, also de-Brahmanization. I think this is why Kancha Gopal Guru, some of their works in their own different ways are so important. Anyway, I gave you some time to think. And by the way, I'll take this occasion also to encourage CPOL and CPS to come together. In fact, the SSS and SIS don't have much interaction except for individual levels. And and language centers. Language centers have some people who do excellent philosophy. They have no connection with the SSS. So the divides even in one university are so sharp. I'm sorry, I may not have the right to say this, but I, as someone who feels like an insider of JNU, sometimes I arrogate to myself right to say this. So, Bhikhu, have you got some time to reflect?
Well, you certainly have, and that has been quite useful. So thank you for it.
Please, you respond to 2-3 questions which were raised.
This Adivasi question was one.
Yeah.
First one. I wasn't quite sure what point you were making by calling Adivasis the original people of India. I mean, that's absolutely true. Adivasi, that's what the word itself means. They are the original inhabitants. But what was it that you wanted to build on it?
No, his question was their thought, their knowledge system, are they recognized as a part of the Indian political thought, Indian tradition, when they are articulated?
Yes, which is just as the Harijan, the Dalit thought was not recognized. Not only Dalit thought, the Dalits themselves were not recognized as human beings. I mean, the Hindus have been absolutely brutal in all these respects. So that point is well taken. If you exclude a whole category of people, and therefore you also exclude their thoughts and feelings and sensibilities. Agreed. Should happen. Gradually they are being integrated into the system, and their thought is now beginning to matter. I think in Gandhian age, you had quite a few thinkers from the Adivasi community, like Thakkar Bapa and a few others. So the thought was being recognized. So that's the Adivasi question. What was the second question?
Rahul Mukherjee had asked how to really go about bridging the gap between our lack of knowledge of classical texts and the need for sort of understanding the totality or the larger canvas of Indian tradition, philosophical tradition.
Why is that a problem? The larger canvas of the
Rahul,
Indian.
you want to come in? Why is that a problem? Because we are not asked to learn.
Yeah, I mean, it was a slight. I mean, I think Professor Mohanty kind of almost asked 100% of the question.
No, say it again, Professor Mohanty.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I? Yeah. My question was that, given the 3, standard problems that you have articulated so brilliantly, the problem of the transcendental philosopher and universalization, the lack of social groundedness in disciplines like anthropology and sociology, and the datedness of the philosophical inspiration in the polis and the state, you're trying to tell us that we should not necessarily just provincialize, but kind of universalize a kind of a knowledge body which brings more into the center of attention materials that belong to other traditions, which require a kind of knowledge that we lack. So in doing that, of course, if we had mastery over, let's say, many more vernacular dialects, and of course we can, I mean, many of us do read, Hindi or Bangla or Oriya, but
Many of us who did what?
Can you hear?
Yeah. Okay. Now let him answer. Yeah.
I can't hear you. Gopal.
But you got the point, Bhikhu Bhai. You got his problem. No.
No. So can you hear
Machine
me,
is
Professor?
playing up.
Yeah, I
Can
can.
you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
But Professor Parekh can't hear me, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's what the issue was. Yeah, he could not hear you, Rao. Yeah.
I see.
And maybe I should just.
I think no. I think we cannot continue this. Oh my goodness! Now he has. Yes, you want to make some final comments, Bhikhu Bhai? Ankush Kumar. Narendra, how long can we go on?
Sir, I think we have already crossed 27 minutes more.
No,
So,
because we started half an hour late.
yeah.
Yes.
I think if we, because now if we can close, let's say in next 4 to 5 minutes, that
All right, 4 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You take 3 minutes, Bhikhu Bhai. I'll take 1 minute. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it was such a delicate mechanism that we had to handle it with great care. And
Yeah.
your voice kept avoiding us from time to time. I'm with you now. No,
Okay.
Gopal, I'm sorry.
Your last comments for the next 2 minutes.
Yes, well, I want to address the question that was asked. Vasanthi, just please remind me of the question you were asking.
Should I just?
Yeah,
should I
please.
just-
Yeah, Rahul. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
No. Rahul, I think I think from his address you have enough clues to answering that. And Vasanthi, you still want him to say something more?
No, I'm happy to have another conversation another time.
Perfectly happy.
Go ahead, let's
And
close.
Ankush, then you ask your last question. Ankush.
Yes, sir.
Ankush Kumar.
Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you
So
are.
thank you very much to provide us the insight of political philosophy. So there is one comment and little observation from my side. Do you really think, sir, this question is for Professor Parekh? Do you really think there is a continuity in the essence of thinking regarding on some aspects of human being, like believing in equal worth, respect, dignity, and every person is a rational and human being across from Western to Indian tradition? For instance, the Kantian concept of intrinsic value of human being and the Ambedkar concept of self-respect is very much similar. I didn't find any difference because like Kantian concept always also says that there is no relative value of human beings, and Ambedkar also says that self-respect is the main component of human being. Without self-respect, human being lives like a disgraced life. Similarly, that you see the Hegelian concept of
Got your point. Now, yeah. So is there a continuity throughout the world in the human tradition?
and second very sorry sir, but second very relevant question, that is about the oral tradition. That whatever we are reading in the philosophy or political philosophy, that is written and we know that what author says. But if you go to the ground realities, people have their own tradition, oral tradition, which is more worthy, which is not in written. And they have a very important component of self-respect. They have very, you can say, a very appropriate theories to understand the self-respect concept or dignity of human beings, which is not addressed till now by any academics or in a formal academics, which is really very disappointing.
Okay, thank you.
I,
And Bhikhu Parekh.
no, I agree with both the points she's making. There may be minor quarrels here or there, whether dignity is the same as self-respect, whether self-respect in Ambedkar is grounded in the same way as in Hegel. I mean, but these are minor differences. I would say I agree entirely. This no, and Ambedkar in particular, he talks about self-respect at one point where he says, you know, the day we have self-respect, we'll be free. The day the slave says, I am proud of myself, he is free. And this enormous concern that nothing will happen unless the downtrodden people, the Dalits, build up a sense of self-respect, that they will not lower themselves in any way, kowtow to anybody or bow to anybody, all sorts of things. So this is all splendid. I mean, I agree. The notion of self-respect is a complex one. It comes basically from Kant. Others have similar ideas, but not quite the same. And Kant talks about self-respect by grounding self in a transcendental, noumenal way, so that in respecting the self, you're respecting the Almighty, respecting the principle of God, of divinity. But otherwise, I mean, I agree entirely of all that you have said.
Thank you. I think it has been a wonderful session, and I think we have taken everybody who had raised hands.
Sir, sorry to intervene, but second question did not address yet about the oral tradition.
Yes, oral tradition is also part of it's a tradition in many societies. Almost all societies with a long history have oral tradition, for the simple reason that 1,000 years ago or a little longer, there was no writing, there was only speaking. And even when writing began, people still have an oral tradition. You know, they lots of other things are conveyed not through writing, but by speaking. So, in that sense, oral tradition has always been and will continue to be the part of every civilization. And the point that Foucault and others have made, that when people write, how does it force them to organize themselves? If I'm conveying an idea through speaking, as opposed to writing, what are the differences I have to undergo? And writing becomes a very difficult and demanding activity, unlike oral tradition where I can freely speak what I like without notes or without having to prepare.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it has been a wonderful session. Thank you very much, Bhikhu.
Kindly organize a joint CPS CPOT Young Scholar Seminar next year.
That is your request, and I think I will fully endorse. I think the young scholars should take the initiative, and you know, that will be a very concrete outcome of these 2 days, and many such ideas have come. I will just make one point following the last question. You know, the concept of the text,
yes,
has to be revisited completely. I mean, you know, the old notion of the text as a written text has to be expanded into, you know, a philosophical text, or a as we know and we refer to. I think we have to see the text in multiple sources, in poetry, in cultural artifacts, and oral tradition of many kinds. Because otherwise, you can have a Brahminic Shruti tradition,
yes,
also falling prey to several such rigidities. But oral tradition in terms of, you know, music, dance, poetry, and you know, many manifestations Therefore, how do you take a body of symbols, expressions of many kinds, and find some coherence and see some meaning in it? That will be a kind of way we find a new study of text, or creative reading of text, creative construction of text, creative acknowledgement of text. So I think this is just one of the many insights emerging from this discussion. And the 2 days have been most fascinating and hopeful. I think my pessimism about our intellectual failures is really now qualified by recalling all the brilliant insights from 3 generations. Bhikhu Parekh's generation, your teacher's generation, and the students' generation. 3 generations who have, maybe 4, I don't know, generations who have been present, and they have enriched the study of politics, I think, for many, many years to come. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Gopal.
Yeah, may I request, thank you so much, sir. Thank you, everyone. May I request now Shivani to come in and to present vote of thanks. And then finally, I'll be presenting vote of thanks for the whole conference. Kindly stay
Good
back.
evening. Good evening, everyone. At last, we have reached the end of our 2-day event. On behalf of CPS, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the chair Professor Manoranjan Mohanty, and the speaker, Professor Bhikhu Parekh, for the valedictory session. I also thank Dr. Rajeshri Das Gupta for introducing the session. I further want to express gratitude to Amrit and Vishnu for making such a wonderful video. We will be uploading it on YouTube as well. Lastly, I thank Rashi for reporting the session. And last but not the least, the audience. You all have been a very patient listeners. Now, I request our chairperson, Professor Narendra Kumar, to give the formal vote of thanks. Please, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shivani. Thanks. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone who have been directly or indirectly associated with the inaugural webinar commemorating CPS at 50 Foundations and Frontiers in Political Science. Beginning with the guest of honor, Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, Rector, for accepting the invitation and guaranteeing administration side involvement in the event with his valuable inputs for looking at the discipline. Profound thanks to the Dean of School of Social Sciences, Professor Dipendranath Das, for not only chairing the inaugural session, but also for his supporting and encouraging words for the center. Gratitude is due to the chair for the valedictory session, Professor Manoranjan Mohanty. Special thanks to Professor Bhikhu Parekh for his commemorative valedictory address and his constant intellectual and material support to the center. Very emotional thanks to all the former faculty members who could join and are not formally part of the inaugural webinar. Many thanks to the chairs of all the sessions for accepting the invitation and making the event meaningful with their comments. This being the webinar where former CPS faculty members and the former students were the focus to tell us the journey of CPS and its contribution to the discipline. Thanks to all of them with deepest gratitude and reverence for making the center what it looks today. Thanks to the colleagues for introducing the chairs and speakers in the different sessions. Thanks to all the participants online. Many of you have been invisible in true sense of the term, but continuously being here during the event. Of course, CPS alumni whose presence makes a lot of sense at this juncture for the center. Thanks to all the current faculty members of CPS, especially the members of the coordination committee, Professor Anupan Roy, Saifali Jha, Manindranath Thakur, V. Biju Kumar, Papya Sen Gupta, Tapan Kumar Bihari. In fact, Tapan Kumar Bihari, who got COVID positive day before yesterday only, and we wish him fast recovery. My special thanks to the colleagues who were not formally part of the coordination committee, but very encouraging and coming forward. And among them, Rajeshri Das Gupta, who despite his ophthalmic health issues, was always available to help us and support us. Another colleague, Sudhir Kumar Sudhar, has also been constant in touch and coming to the chair's office asking about what can be done. My colleagues, Asha Sarangi, Vidhu Verma, helped in preparing some of the aspects of my inaugural address. Thanks to both of them. Without the students, volunteers, constant support, the event would not have been possible to be a successful online. Supriya, for last 1 week, has been working as a magnet for student volunteers. Shivani constantly working to stream the event on YouTube to be available for many of us. Jigyasa functioned like a guide to those functioning as reporters and also those presenting vote of thanks in each session. In fact, I was supposed to present a summary, but due to lack of time now, we are not presenting that. Actually, if you look at where the volunteers are staying, putting up now, you can see that it's like a war room wherein there are 6 to 7 systems, that is laptops, and they are constantly working for last 2 days. Present non-teaching staff of the center, and I remember Mr. Jamal Ahmed, who has been referred sometimes. He was a non-teaching staff with the center for a long time. Many thanks to everyone, and request you to keep supporting the center with your valuable participation in the future events in the commemorative year. Thank you so much, and thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may, with your permission,
Yeah.
Narendra,
Yes, sir.
on behalf of the panelists, I would like to thank Narendra and his team and the faculty for having organized this and having given us this opportunity to share many nostalgic moments for people like me, to be and to see many familiar faces. I see Sudhanshu there, and I see Jigyasa, who is a Facebook friend of mine. It has been a really wonderful occasion, and to see Rahul in faraway Heidelberg. So thank you on behalf, if I may presume to say that, on behalf of all the speakers and the chairs whom you invited.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. In fact, the senior faculty members, you, Professor Mohanty, Professor Bhikhu, Parekh, you have been constantly being here for the last 2 days. And I would say, I would not like to bring in age, but we as youngsters should be learning from 3 of you at least, that we should be having that much of patience and listen to everyone at this stage also. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.